So today we're talking about data.
I love data.
It's a probably something that people think is more simple and straightforward than it really is.
Probably.
Right?
Yeah.
As we say, data is a superpower.
Yeah. Well, at least we want to help people turn data into a superpower for sure.
But with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
But it also means, and with anything with great responsibility, that means it's not easy.
Right.
In many ways.
Yep.
And one of the easy, and you go into the philosophical into that, but I think the real thing that is not easy and is more complex than people realize is sort of the behind the scenes of, aggregating data, making sure we know what's important, having those KPIs, and then using those to our advantage.
And even understanding really what the best practices are, obviously associated with setting up KPIs. So lot we can get into. Where do you want to start?
I think just broad overview, why is data one of the 9 core competencies?
Well, because there's so many different reasons. So I'll just try to go into, what comes to top of mind. Well, number one, when we have decent data, we can see what's working and what's not working. And when we have a sense for what's working and what's not working, we obviously can allocate our time a heck of a lot more efficiently and effectively. And if you don't have good data, especially for like founders, you've got a sixth sense whether things are going well or they're not going well. And if you don't have data, then you're probably going to be sitting here all the time with this sixth sense that's either things are good or not good. And sometimes your sixth sense will be good and sometimes your sixth sense will be not so good. But without data, for me as an example, I feel like it's like flying an airplane in the fog with no instrument panel. I mean, it's really, really hard. And it's scary, right? If you have no idea how things are performing. And so, the same, you could use a different metaphor, which is imagine coaching a team and, they kick you off the sidelines and they throw you into the locker and you're still supposed to be coaching the team, but you have no idea what's going on. You don't know what down it is. You don't know anything, right? So it's almost impossible. So everyone has data. The question now is how useful is it, and how good of a job are you doing with regard to helping everybody in the company understand why data is good for everybody? Because some people, as we were talking to a little bit, or you were getting into, with power comes great responsibility. So a lot of times what we'll see in the feedback we get from our clients, in particular from sort of people who aren't on the senior leadership team, and most often who are sort of in entry-level positions, they're like, well, why? They feel like they're being micromanaged because people are watching their data. And it's like, no, it's actually, if it's done properly, we all understand when things are going well. And if they're going well, and we've talked about this before on the podcast, if they're going well, a great team leader or a great coach is going to let you just run, right? Well, I don't need to worry about everything's green. Awesome. Hope, just let me know if I can help.
Well, if you don't have the markers to figure out where things are going wrong when they're going wrong.
Right.
It's like not giving your doctor access to your blood work.
Right.
It's like having those markers is pretty helpful in trying to figure it out. We could sit here and try to just, find the needle in the haystack. But if we can have something that gives us a direction to go in and find out where things are red and where we should start looking, and if it's organized appropriately, then we can dig into those and find everything. Yeah.
And we talked about in a prior podcast on process, right? We talked about how, the big idea of when you think about a process, you should think about what it is that you want at the end of the process. And then you should work your way backwards in terms of the steps to get what you want. And so, the example we used in the last podcast on process was if one of your processes is processes is to end up with a client. And let's just say the client signs a contract, and the contract signing that's the end of the process, right? For going out and finding and bringing a client on board. And then what's the step before that? Well, the step before that is they get a contract. And the step before that is maybe there's a letter of understanding, some form of whatever. And the step before that is, maybe it's dealing with people having objections. And the step before that is walking them through the offering. And the step before that is is presenting. And the step before that is getting the meeting. And the step before that, et cetera, right? I know I
thought you were going to stop that like 4 steps ago. I was like, wow, you're really pushing it. Oh, he's going to continue.
Well, I'm trying, right? But every one of those steps is measurable. Right. And now the question is what does good look like? Is it that, once we get a letter of understanding, 98% of the time we have a contract. But that's what we do with the KPIs is we think about all these different things that we're doing, in particular things that are repeatable, because just like on the processes, the KPIs should be measuring things that are happening all the time. The best KPIs are leading indicators, which means that they're at the beginning of that chain I was going through, right? As opposed to the end, because the end, the long chain, yeah, I could have gone on. I saw your look. It's like, are you really going to do this? But in the end, there's these, there's revenues and there's margins and there's number of customers and, there are these, this is what we want. But how do we make sure that everything we're doing, right? Like I like to say is, number one, we don't make money because we want to make money. We make money because people value what it is we do. And so what we do is an input for them, right? But we have all these inputs to become an input for them. So let's measure those inputs and make sure that we're doing the things that we think we need to do consistently enough. We're having the results that we want to have. And, one of the things that people, tend to do is they'll create KPIs and targets that are like these goals, like, wouldn't it be amazing? But we don't want to measure the wouldn't it be amazing. We want to measure the, hey, if it's not performing particularly well, if we're not hitting sort of the basic targets associated with decent performance, is there an issue? And so you want to have that target be equal to that thing that says, hey, there's an issue. And obviously, for this to be healthy, back to with power comes great responsibility, is we need to agree on what the KPIs are. And then we need to agree on, hey, if this number is at this level, there's an issue. And then, by the way, if there's an issue, then it's cool for us to have a conversation, right? So ultimately, you want to be able to have KPIs that are leading indicators. The best of them could be daily. Almost everybody mostly is using weekly KPIs, weekly leading indicators. And we have a sense whether or not, everything's working really, really well. And the things that we need to do are progressing for us to be able to generate the type of outputs that are consistent with the cost that we need to generate in order to justify the cost of all the inputs, which are the humans and the machines and everything else. It's, it's a part of our business.
Going into the responsibility and then how people can misuse data.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting place to go down because I think everyone understands, it's important.
Right.
But there's times where we can be too reliant on it. There's times where we can underestimate it. And then there's times where we can just misuse it.
Right.
And so I think one of those things regarding KPIs is some people want to just make everything a KPI.
Right.
And you have a list of 300 KPIs on one thing.
Yeah.
And when you try to make everything important, then nothing really is.
Yeah.
And so what issues do you see surrounding data and scorecard or anything measurables when it comes to coaching?
I'm going to be honest, like I'm always honest about, we have too many KPIs across most of our departments and most of our teams. We're guilty of that because we're big data, freaks, hogs, whatever. It would be awesome. One of the things I've wanted to build into the software is you have a toggle and it says basically if something's green or yellow, don't even show it on the scorecard. I just want to see the reds. You do that, or maybe you just say per every single KPI, I have that switch, right?
If this cool in a meeting,
huh?
It'd be cool. That feature would be really cool in a meeting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If this is green, I don't want to see it, right? And imagine that for the company, the departments, the teams, the individuals, right? And and I know I've said this before. If you have a really good set of KPIs, forget about, I'm not going to answer your specific question. I will get back to it, right? Around the 50 KPIs is an example per team. But if you have, let's say, hundreds of KPIs and 98% of those KPIs are green, as a CEO, I can tell you I'm a pretty happy bloody camper, right? Especially if they're all built around targets that help us understand that whether or not there's an issue someplace. That is one of my dreams. It's been way too long, right? But it was one of my dreams is to give every one of our clients that ability, right? To basically be able to see this screen. And if they want to, they can see them all, or they just see the greens, they can see the reds, they can see the yellows, right? And they can see it at the company level, department level, the team level, et cetera, right? It's just sort of like imagine the accountability chart or the org chart, right? Blown up and giving you all those colors. So now, the question is back to, how many is too much, right? I think that if you don't have sort of a red, green, yellow approach to it all, and you just have 50, right? And you're going through every single one of them, that's overwhelming. And what a lot of the operating system coaches teach is every single team should have 5 to 15. Well, once again, like I said, we don't have 15. Now we have, on our senior leadership team, we have 16 departments now. So even if you just get it down to 3, because that's a conversation I want to have. If you get it down to 3, obviously 3 times 16 is almost 40, right?
No, it's 48.
48, right? Okay, so 48.
I wanted to let you try to do that one.
48.
I thought you were just going to be slow but get the right answer, but no, I was too optimistic.
Slow and got the wrong answer. Yeah. I don't know why I was thinking 39.
That's a red data point
13
for you.
13 times 3, right? What's 13 times 3? 39.
Thank you. It's a different.
I know.
Whatever.
I know. That's what whatever reason I was there. I know you're enjoying this on my behalf. If you've got no red, green, and yellow, and you got 50 things up there, right? It's obviously a hell of a lot, and you're probably going to lose the forest for the trees. But this is the other tension I have, which is I believe if you have one KPI on a team or for an individual or for a department, right, you're overemphasizing something. It's always overemphasizing something. So my bias, and it's not consistent with what some people teach, right, is I like to have like 3 to 5. 3's awesome, but sometimes 5. But if you just have one KPI, let's just go to a simple seat, right? The simplest of seats, stratum 1, entry-level position. They've got a quantity to produce. They've got a quality to produce. You got following the processes, right? And you got showing up and giving us 40 good hours. That's at least our company, right? And so now if I just emphasize showing up and the only one I watched was 40 good hours, they could show up, they could twiddle their thumbs. Or if I just had quality, yeah, one amazing thing, but they're supposed to produce 50. If I just had quantity, right? They produce 50 things, but they're all for crap and they're all going back to redo or whatever it's called, right? So my bias is I deeply understand and appreciate the notion of 5 to 15, but I think that you almost always find 3 to 5 KPIs per seat, per team, per department, right? That make sure that we're not overemphasizing one thing versus another thing. Does that make sense?
It's hard to distill everything into one thing.
Right.
I mean, unless for a stratum 1 seat, you could kind of do that is how it relates to the rest of the team. I'm just thinking if you have a social media manager and their thing is just total followers or subscribers across the thing, right? And it's like, that could be something, but also it's just... It
could be. I mean, it's possible, right?
But if you go up, you're not going to have a stratum 3, right? In this case, we're talking about SLT.
Right.
A stratum 3 team member has one KPI.
Right.
That doesn't...
No.
There's nothing you can do with it, right? But 3's we like threes. I know you like odd numbers.
Right.
So 3 makes sense. And then 5, but then you go over 5, right? If we use 6 times. So, okay, I have 2 areas we could go down. First, because I think we've experienced both to some extent. One being an over-reliance on data. Right. Sort of just being, right, because I guess the quote that comes to mind is like, data is everything, data is our creator.
Right.
And where is the issue with that mentality?
Yeah. Well, if we're getting back to, are we data-driven, are we vision-driven to some extent?
Well, a little. I think vision-driven versus market-driven would be the correct spectrum there. Right. But data-driven is kind of is very similar to market-driven.
Right.
I just think market is more all-encompassing for that side of things.
One of the things to talk about here is that if you look at data, interestingly, if you look at it through the lens of one of the assessments that we use all the time, which is called Colby, right? And Colby helps us make sure that we're not putting people into seats that they're just not going to naturally be good in terms of problem solving. So Colby helps us identify people's problem solving preferences. And there are some seats where people are they need to be very much data driven and process driven. So that's that means that they're mid to high in terms of fact finding. They're mid to high in terms of being able to follow through on things, and then they're typically lower in terms of quick start, which is comfort with risk and ambiguity. And the last one is implementer, which has to do with in some regards, it's more complicated than this, but in some regards, it has to do with whether or not the nature of the work you work with is more sort of conceptual versus physical and three-dimensional, right? And you can have conceptual three-dimensional work, but what we've found is that engineers, as an example, even though in theory they're working within a computer, a lot of them are high on implementer because they're dealing with three-dimensional models in their head when they're working on things. And then they also love to, as we know, they're great at, on our channel of makers, they're always making stuff, right? So you have a lot of engineers who are high in implementer. But let's go back to the fact finding. If you think about dominance, if you had 4 people who were equal, Colby's research shows that the person who has the facts tends to dominate the conversation. So people who are more efficiency and fact-oriented tend to dominate people who are more creative and effectiveness-oriented in terms of just like how they think and how they process and how they engage in conversations. That's part of the issue with...
At least within the business world.
Yeah.
That's outside, it's a different thing. Yeah. But
in the business world...
it's no one got fired for buying IBM. Thing.
Well, that's another thing, right?
Yeah, but
in the business world, in terms of having a conversation around options, right? That's a good example of where if you over-index on data, you may be sort of underappreciating the longer game, the qualitative side of the decision making, the more
possible serendipity that comes with exploring the unknown,
and the emotional side and other things that are frankly very important as well. The data is it's like everything. It's a double-edged sword. But I do think that when it comes to certain areas within the organization, those areas where efficiency is important, data is a very, very powerful tool that should be understood and leveraged.
Person who has the facts is going to win.
Yeah.
But I think the better thing is you need to have the facts, but then if you could tell a story with that and if you can internalize that and express it, then that's the best. Because I think persuasion through the emotions is the best way.
Right.
As long as you can back it up with facts. Otherwise, right, one's going to win in some things, but you're going to win every single thing if you have both of those tools.
Yeah, because the emotions sink to a deeper level and of understanding and just being seared into the brain, for lack of a better term.
Basically, they told people just a bunch of facts about something, and they told people a story about something.
Yeah. And
then right after, people were more persuaded by the facts or whatever, but then the next day, going back and figuring out what happened, it was like 60, basically 2/3 to 1/3 favoring of the story versus the data.
Yeah.
So I just think that that's an interesting.
Well, even, I did several hours on improving your memory, right? It was a thing through Vistage, and all of the stuff that we were challenged to memorize, he gave us tricks that basically converted it all into stories and emotions.
Well, that's how we evolved. That's what matters, right? Stories, emotions, patterns.
Yeah.
The things that, right, and the numbers is.
Yeah.
And those things, like, they're important.
Right.
But it's a tool, and you're kind of fighting evolution and
but
things a little bit.
But it's interesting, right? Yeah. Obviously, emotions have been around for tens of thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands of years, right? Hundreds of thousands of years.
Just do a whole neurological breakdown here, but
right. And exactly. So you go to maybe millions of years, right? That's not the point. The point is that
prefrontal cortex
numbers have not been around for, numbers have been around for, I don't know, 10, 20,000 years.
And I guess this might not be a great analogy, but I'm going to try to take the data thing,
right,
and make it a little archetypal.
Okay.
So I'm sure most people have seen The Lion King.
Hopefully.
If you haven't,
check it out.
It's a good movie. You should watch it. I think it's out of theaters. It's back on DVD now. But in Lion King, we have Mufasa the king.
Right.
And then you have Zazu, the bird that flies around and is always keeping an eye on everything.
Right.
And Zazu is not the ruler. He's not the leader, but he informs the leader. He informs Mufasa about everything that's going on in the kingdom.
Right.
And he's a big part of that. And so when Simba goes out into the elephant graveyard, Zazu is whatever. He knows everything, right? He is the eye. He is the keeper of all things, all the information, whether that's, what's happening or that's numbers of things, right? It's pretty much the same sort of deal.
Right.
And when Mufasa dies and Scar becomes king, Scar locks Zazu in a cage because Scar wants to be willfully blind to the things that are going on around him. He doesn't want that information.
Right.
And I think, right, it's very important that the leader has access to all that and does not hide unwanted things in the fog.
Yeah. Well, it's the expression we use all the time. Average players want to be
left alone.
Good players
when you're told
want to coach.
Yeah.
And great players want to know the truth.
And so it's all about knowing the truth, and that's what data helps you do.
Yes, 100%. But like you said earlier, you got to be, it's like everything. You can't over rely on data, but to not have it's foolish.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's right. It is the eye. It is the thing that sees into that. But you have to be able to take that in and interpret it for what it is and make decisions utilizing that.
One of the things that I think is really, really helpful about data is not just using it to understand when there's an issue or when there's not an issue, but ultimately, when you look at every single seat, if you really think about what's the data that's really important and informative of how the seat's working, just that exercise alone is extraordinarily useful, right? And, part of my interviewing process years ago, and I don't use it as much anymore predominantly because I'm sort of last interview and it's probably would be weird, but is, when I'm talking to someone, I'm like, okay, so what are the roles, accountabilities, and responsibilities, and how would you measure success in terms of each of those, right? What would be the KPIs you utilize? And then I'll say, look, I'll give you 5 minutes and I'll walk out and I'll come back and let me know what the KPIs are. And if they don't understand the math of the thing that they're doing and they're applying for, that's a pretty interesting signal to me. So I think, my brain, it's, that understanding the math of the business is really important. We want every department leader to understand the math of their business. You'd like the team leaders to understand the math associated with what they're doing. And so just, part of KPIs is just getting clear on the math.
That's right. Math is the objective universal language.
Yeah.
That we all can.
Which gets back to the one final comment on data, which is, look, if we have, I think it's James Barksdale quote from, the Netscape founder, co-founder, from, right, what was that, the early 90s or something. I can't remember, late 80s, early 90s. But he said, look, if we're going to make decisions, let's make them based upon facts. If we can't make a decision based upon objective facts, then we're going to make it based upon opinions. And if we're going to make decisions based upon opinions, guess whose opinion is going to matter more than everybody else here? And so you want the data to support the perspective that you have, in particular when it comes to sort of sitting there with someone who's got a little more authority, right, within the organization. So it's helpful for all of us.
It's the easiest way, because you can go out and create an amazing argument in your favor and try to get all the rhetoric right and do all that. But if you just come with great data, great information, all that research, that's a much wiser game plan.
And simpler.
Yeah, a lot simpler.
Yeah. Cool. Data.